So what I was playing there just now while improvising, the thing that was sort of tying all of that together was the sound of tenths. So in pretty much every chord I was playing, there were 3-note voicings, and in the outer notes, the relationship between those 2 notes was tenths, either major tenths or minor tenths, and that was what was partly giving it that kind of lyrical quality. You were hearing this. You're kind of constantly hearing that nice, sweet harmony. What I'd like to do in this video is, in a fairly sort of brief way, just give you access to this sound world so that you can take advantage of it in your own compositions and improvisations. This is quite a versatile technique. You know, it can be used in quite sort of rich, sonorous passages. Or it can be something that's very delicate, say especially if we add a piano, we start to get into this sort of sound world. So the first way that I want to discuss accessing this sound is focusing on thinking about chords, so either chord progressions or sequences, or just individual chords on their own. So let's take individual chords to begin with. So to start us off, there are 2 ways of voicing major and minor chords that kind of put us immediately into this sound world. So for major chords, the voicing that I want to share first of all is this. So we've got the E at the bottom, then we've got a 6th up to the middle C, and then a 5th above that, and the outer voices are in that 10th. The other voicing of a major chord that I want to focus on is this one, where you have the C at the bottom and the E at the top, and it's all quite spaced out. For minor, it's exactly the same. We just swap out the major third for a minor third. So it's going to sound like this. C minor, and this. We can start to derive material by just wiggling around the outer voices and keeping the middle note the same. So this is a very kind of melody-led thing that I'm thinking of. I'm sort of hearing the da 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 in my head, and I'm trying to go for that, and I'm sort of using my ear. Just sort of try to use your ears to see if you're getting that kind of sweet sound. You know, for example, there is not so sweet, or if we kind of start there and then go here, it's not so sweet. What we're looking for is this kind of sound, or this kind of sound. Let's do the same thing with a minor chord. This time I'll take G minor, for example. Or something a little darker. So again, the kind of sense of unison between the outer voices, the sense of just coherence, sort of gives that a feeling of making sense to the ear, and the stability of that sort of single note in the middle kind of makes sense. And so even though you get a lot of interesting interaction and fluctuation going on, those 2 elements are kind of consistent. So in those examples, I was essentially thinking of the harmony as kind of static. You know, that whole little improvisation was just G minor in my head. G minor kind of tweaked. Now let's actually progress through a little chord progression. So one that I like to use quite a lot when I'm practicing is to just take a progression of chords going up by tones or whole steps. So, for example, starting on C major, let's take another kind of sequence, this time going up in minor thirds, so from C minor to E flat minor to G flat minor and so on. And if we combine that chord sequence with the concept of wiggling around the notes like we were doing previously, it sounds like this. Another thing you could do is go around the cycle of fifths like this. Once you're comfortable and you can access different chords more freely, then you can start to create your own progressions and just think chord to chord and maybe sprinkling in a little bit of spice by wiggling around the outer notes like we were doing earlier. So here's a little chord sequence that James Horner is quite known for using. It's one of his signature sounds. And if we embellish that slightly using this kind of wiggle method, now I want to introduce a slightly different but related way of thinking about it, and that's to think more in terms of scales or modes. And so that leads us to something that sounds a bit like this. So there, rather than thinking of a new chord for every note, I'm thinking of, in this case, the F major scale for the most part, and keeping the sort of shape roughly the same, but tweaking it in order to stay within the notes of the scale. The easiest way to show you is actually if I go into C major. So here's a starting chord. So again, we have that classic outer tenths. So we're maintaining that relationship, and then I'm going to go down another step. If we start on a minor chord, an A minor instead, and stay within the white notes, what we're effectively doing is, rather than it being a C major scale, it suddenly becomes an A natural minor scale or Aeolian scale, A to A with all the white notes. So let's take a minor voicing with the tenths on the outside and drop it down through the scale. So now, thinking in terms of the scale, what we can do is start to create melodies and patterns all within that scale. Rather than just playing it note by note, we can do things like this. Or we can just kind of freely kind of sketch out melodies within that scale. So that's thinking in terms of scales. Now I'll try to demonstrate how those two different ways of thinking can come together. So I'll start by doing something kind of thinking in terms of scales. And then chords. And now scale. Chords. Scale. chords, scale, chords, 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 scale, Just to round off, I wanted to give you a couple of little bonus tips and little sort of extensions to this idea. So far we've just been talking about simple 3-note major and minor chords, and then sort of tweaked versions of those. The thing about major and minor chords is that they're quite flexible in the way that if you stick a different bass note to what you expect and then play a major or a minor chord over the top, you can end up with all sorts of interesting, sort of quite spicy sounding clashes or more exotic sounding harmonic worlds opening up. So I've got a G bass note here, and I'm going to play an A major voicing over the top, and then I'm going to wiggle around the top notes and the bottom notes in unison. Gives us a very different kind of sound to if we just heard the A major on its own. With the G, so that's just something that you can experiment with, taking this whole concept and then just sticking a different bass note underneath and seeing where that takes you. Another way to embellish or depart from the sounds that we've been exploring so far is to take the voicing again, say D minor. We're going to do this one with a lovely tenths, and just tweaking one note in the chord but keeping everything else the same. Or say the middle note. Or the lower note. So here, for example, we're breaking our rule of the tenths, having the sweet tenths, but we're sort of allowing it because it's kind of contextualized by just taking one step outside. So that's another little tip. You can deliberately break the rules and think in terms of just tweaking one note within the chord and then maybe returning and continuing, or maybe using that as a bridge to explore a new kind of musical territory. Finally, in the context of improvising, it's quite useful to be comfortable accessing this chord voicing as well. I said not to use this because it breaks our rule. It doesn't have tenths on the outside. But melodies often include arpeggios. So for example, a melody that goes, melodies very often go through the chord tones, and if you want to maintain that sort of similar shape, it's useful to be able to go like this and then continue with those tenths. Just going through the inversions like that as a kind of bridge. So there's our one which is forbidden. So actually, it's quite a useful thing to have under your fingers, or just to know that you can combine that particular shape as a sort of passing note, and it has the effect of helping kind of gel together the rest of the chords and the rest of those voicings. So that's it. I hope that made some sense. Let me know any questions that you have in the comments, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video. Thanks very much for your attention.